I woke from a coma to an empty room. No dad, no siblings. Just a note from my father. We stopped paying. Good luck. I cried for an hour. Then my lawyer walked in with a man in a suit I didn't recognize. Your father made a mistake. The lawyer grinned. He forgot who you really are. The room smelled like antiseptic. Cold, sterile. A constant beeping in the background that had become almost comforting during the long days I'd spent here. Except it was silent now. And that silence. Deliberate. As if they had all just decided to disappear, to leave me to wake up alone, abandoned. My eyes, heavy and still adjusting to the light, moved across the room, but it was hard to focus. Everything seemed hazy. As though I was still floating in that strange, suspended world between sleep and waking. I could barely remember the accident, the crash that had put me here. But I knew enough to know that something was wrong. Something was very wrong. And turned my head to the side, and there it was, a single folded piece of paper resting on the bedside table. I reached for it, my fingers shaking, not from weakness but from something deeper. Something that twisted in my gut as I realized the note was from him, my father. I opened it slowly, carefully. The handwriting was neat, too neat, like it was written with cold, deliberate intent. Was stopped paying. Good luck. No signature, nothing else. My heart sank. I hadn't seen him in months. Called. He hadn't even bothered to check on me. He'd let me rot in this hospital bed while he went on with his life, his company, his family. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped inside. She looked at me, her expression changing as soon as she realized I was awake. Miss Morgan, you're awake. Her voice sounded distant, like she wasn't sure what to say. How long? I croaked. 3 months. She replied, her voice softer now. Is there anyone we should call? My voice raspy, barely a whisper. It wasn't just the coma that made it hard to speak. It was the suffocating emptiness that hung between her words, the silence that followed. Your father, she said. He's someone who left the note. 2 weeks ago he came in person, said the family would no longer be covering your medical expenses. The note burned in my hands as the nurse spoke, the words sinking deeper into me. How could he? Everything, after all the years I had spent working, sacrificing, making his company what it was. How could he? Good luck. I whispered to myself, the cold reality of it sinking in. Had been nothing more than a liability to him, an inconvenience, and now, even in my most vulnerable moment, he wasn't here. He had left me to die, to be forgotten. My eyes still blurry. I could barely see the man who entered the room behind the nurse. He wasn't alone. Each with someone else, a tall man in a sharply cut suit, his face calm but stern, like he'd seen this all before. Samuel, the lawyer said, his voice smooth but edged with something else. Relief. Or was it something darker? He continued, stepping closer. This is Christopher Vance. I looked at the two men, trying to focus. What is this? I asked, my words thick with confusion. David smiled slightly, a grim expression that was too knowing for comfort. And father made a mistake, Samuel. A very big mistake. He glanced at Christopher, who nodded in silent confirmation. David turned back to me. He forgot who you really are. The words hung in the air like an electric shock, sending a chill through my chest. It was almost as if a weight had been lifted, but a much heavier one had replaced it. For years, I had been invisible. To my family, to everyone. His family partner, the one who worked behind the scenes, my skills and achievements stolen by those who never understood the price of ambition. And now, my father had gone too far. He thought that by cutting me off, it severed all ties, erased all memories of me from his carefully curated world. He had forgotten, however, that in doing so, he had set off something much bigger. I wasn't just his daughter anymore. I wasn't the girl who had been left to die in a hospital room. I was the one with the power now. And I was coming for everything he thought he had taken from me. David Chen's voice snapped me out of my daze. I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to understand something. Mother left you more than just memories, Samuel. She left you a weapon. I blinked, trying to focus. His words felt like a fog I couldn't push through. A weapon. My mother had been many things, brilliant, firstly independent and private, but a weapon. That wasn't something I ever imagined. Christopher Vance, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a file. The contents were thick, heavy. I could feel the weight of it before he placed it on the table in front of me. He didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch between us as I stared at the papers. David spoke again, his voice low, purposeful. When your mother died, Samuel, she knew what kind of man Michael was. She knew he would try to erase her memory, her legacy, so she took steps, precautions. Everything was set up long before your accident. I watched as he slid the top page of the file toward me. My hands trembled as I reached for it, the paper feeling too cold under my fingertips. As I scanned the page, my heart began to race. It was an incorporation document, something I had seen 1,000 times before, but this one was different. This one listed Jennifer Hayes as the majority owner of Aeroglyph Dynamics. 60%, Michael had only 40. My breath caught. The company, The empire they had built, the one I'd been kept in the shadows of for years, wasn't when it seemed. My father had never been the sole founder. My mother had built it. She had been the architect of everything, while Michael had taken the glory, the credit, and the power. David let that sink in for a moment before he spoke again. Nankel had the world believing he was the sole founder. He even convinced the board of directors. But your mother never signed away control. She kept the company's real ownership hidden in a private trust. I trust that now belongs to you. I stared at him, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be true. My mother had been so careful, so secretive about everything. She had always been a mystery to me, even before her death. But this felt like something I could never have expected. She had planned for me. Even in her absence, she had set a path for me to follow. And now, thanks to my father's careless actions, that path was wide open. Christopher cleared his throat, snapping me back to the conversation. There's more. Your mother amended the terms of the trust shortly before her death. It wasn't just a matter of inheritance. It was about control. The trust activates if you are abandoned during a period of incapacitation. I leaned back in the chair, the words spinning in my head. Abandoned. That's exactly what my father had done. He'd abandoned me. He had cut off my medical expenses, left me to die in this sterile room, and in doing so, he'd triggered the very thing that could bring him down. David continued, pulling out another document. When your father stopped paying for your medical bills, he triggered that clause. As of 2 weeks ago, the trust became irrevocable. The money, the shares, the power, it's all yours now. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Invisible. A cog in the machine working without recognition. But now I had the power. I could take everything back. Everything they had stolen from me. Steffer added, the shares, the board votes, the controlling interest in Aeroglyph Dynamics, it all belongs to you. And with that, you have access to everything. Every document, every server, every room in the building, including the boardroom. I could hardly process the words. My mother had thought of everything. She had planned this, and I had never known. I had never even suspected. But now with this knowledge, everything was about to change. Damon reached into his briefcase once more and pulled out a small plastic card. It was heavy official, a security badge. This is yours. Executive override, he said, handing it to me. This grants you full access to the company. You can walk into any room, any meeting, and take control. It's yours. I held the badge in my hand, staring at it as if it were some kind of symbol. The weight of it was nothing compared to the weight of what it represented. This wasn't just a keycard, it was the key to everything I had been denied. Christopher leaned forward, his eyes intense. This is just the beginning. You've been given a weapon, Samuel. It's time to use it. My fingers curled around the badge, the cold plastic a reminder of everything I had lost, and everything I was about to gain. My father had made a mistake, and I would make him pay for it. Not just for abandoning me, but for thinking he could erase me from the company. From everything. It wasn't just the money or the shares, it was the legacy, my mother's legacy, and now, it was mine to claim. I sat there, the room still, everything around me feeling like it was holding its breath, the weight of the words David had just spoken pressed down on me like a heavy stone. I had never known any of this. All my life, I had been kept in the dark, just a shadow in the family business. My father, my stepmother, even my brother Ryan had treated me like an afterthought. Hank worked in the background, building the company with my mind, with my late mother's strategies, while they paraded around, taking credit for what I had done. I could hear my father's voice in my head, cold and dismissive, and not the one who makes the decisions. That's what he had always told me. He'd always put me in my place, reminding me of my role in the company, nothing more than an invisible asset. An invisible asset. And they're the ones who reap the rewards, the recognition, while I stayed behind, buried in data, in codes, in spreadsheets, doing all the work that made the company tick. Ryan the golden child, always standing tall, always fanning the office with the view, always praised for achievements that were not his. I could see him now, swaggering through the office, hands in his pockets, a smug grin on his face. It was as if he had never done a day's worth of real work in his life. Yet somehow, everything I had done for the company was credited to him. And Kimberly, his mother, always quick to remind me of my place. You should be grateful, she would say, her voice laced with sarcasm. Not many girls with your background get these opportunities. The truth stung. The truth I had never allowed myself to believe was finally staring me in the face. My mother had been the mastermind behind the company, not Michael. She had laid the foundation for everything, and I had unknowingly built on that foundation. Every algorithm, every model, every strategic decision that had led to the company's success, I had done that. Yet, no one had ever acknowledged me. No one had even looked my way. David was still talking, but I wasn't really hearing him anymore. The room seemed to fade away as my mind raced. Mother had kept this from me, kept me in the dark, deliberately. She had always been a mystery, even to me. I had never fully understood her. She had kept secrets, hidden things from me. I now realized had been meant to protect me. She knew. She knew exactly what Michael was capable of, and she had planned for it. Planned for me to take control one day, when the time was right. I looked at the trust documents again, the clause. The one that allowed me to take control of the company if I was abandoned during incapacitation. I had been a fool to think my father's abandonment was just the end. No, it was just the beginning. David continued, and his words barely registered. It was all starting to make sense now. The secrecy, the coldness, the way they had treated me for years. My father had thought that by cutting me off, by turning his back on me, he could erase me from the company. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my mother had left me a path to reclaim it all. The shares, the votes, the company. All of it. I stared at the security badge in my hand. A badge that would allow me to walk into any room, any meeting, and take what was rightfully mine. The power I had always been denied was now in my grasp. But it wasn't just the power that was significant. It was the legacy, my mother's legacy. Aeroglyph Dynamics was more than just a company. It was the culmination of years of hard work, years of sacrifice, and now it was mine. Christopher Vance leaned forward, his eyes intense. You have everything you need now, Samuel. The shares, the trust, the access. All you need to do is take it. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. But how? How do I even begin to do that? David stepped forward. You start by taking back what they thought they could steal from you. You start by walking into that boardroom and showing them who you really are. I looked at the badge again, my fingers tightening around it. I had spent years being overlooked, underestimated, invisible. But no more. The time had come to step into the light, to take what was rightfully mine, and to make them regret every moment they had treated me like I didn't matter. I had been their ghost for too long. Now, it was time for them to face the consequences. I would make sure they never forgot my name again. The next few days blurred together as I navigated the overwhelming sea of documents, contracts, and old emails. The suite David had arranged for me at the Four Seasons became my headquarters, my war room. It was a space that smelled faintly of fresh linens and polished wood. But to me it had become a place of raw, calculated intensity. The view from the window stretched across the city, but I couldn't focus on that. All I saw was the shadow of the company below, Aeroglyph Dynamics, the very empire my father had built on my mother's genius. Now something I was determined to reclaim. Christopher Vance and David Chin were there with me every step of the way. Christopher, with his sharp, calculating demeanor, and David, with his steady, methodical approach. I could tell they were both used to playing the game at the highest level, but for me, this was new. The weight of the stakes was suffocating, but I could feel the anger simmering inside me, propelling me forward. I wasn't just fighting for money or power. I was fighting for my mother's legacy, and everything that had been taken from me. For everything my father thought he could erase. The first thing we did was access the company's servers. My mother had built the architecture herself, and in that moment, it felt like I was stepping into her world. Logged in the override badge, my key to the kingdom, and the screen flickered to life. It wasn't the standard login I was used to. Instead it was a schematic, a map of the company's entire infrastructure. It felt like I had just unlocked the door to a hidden vault, and with each click, I began to unravel the truth. The emails, the files, the deleted documents. They were all there. I started digging through everything I could get my hands on, communications between my father and Kimberly, messages exchanged with board members, contracts signed without my knowledge. And there it was, the pattern I had been too blind to see. My work, my contributions, all credited to Ryan. Every important deal, every acquisition, every major contract, I had built those. I had made them happen. And yet, Lafauner had let Ryan take the credit. Hafer watched me closely as I scrolled through the evidence. He didn't speak much, but I could see his eyes gleam with approval. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was war, and I had the ammunition. David, and a strategist, focused on the legal side of things. The trust is just the beginning, he said, as he sifted through the papers. We need to ensure that everything is airtight. If we're going to expose your father's fraud, we can't leave any room for doubt. A wind of his words hit me hard. This wasn't just about a family dispute or a fight for a title, it was about something much bigger. My father had used deceit and manipulation to secure his position. He'd done the same with me. He'd erased me from the narrative, written me out of the story he had created. But he hadn't counted on my mother's foresight. He hadn't counted on me. Days passed in a blur as we continued our work. My mind raced with every new piece of evidence, every new document that proved how deep my father's betrayal ran. The more I uncovered, the more it fueled my determination. I wasn't just going to reclaim what was mine, I was going to dismantle everything he had built on lies. And then we hit a breakthrough. In one of the older CC filings, buried beneath layers of red tape, I found the smoking gun. Michael had used a falsified medical report to declare me permanently incapacitated. Used the very thing he had used to justify restructuring the company and giving Ryan stock options that should have been mine. It was a crime. A federal crime. And now I had the proof. David's face hardened when he saw it. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, his voice low. "He's not just trying to steal your place in the company. He's committing fraud on a massive scale. This could send him to prison." I looked at the documents in front of me, my heart racing. The implications were staggering. But this wasn't about prison, not yet. This was about taking back what was rightfully mine. I had the evidence now, the legal tools, and the power to make it happen. But there was one last step, an act to go public. Christopher had already made the necessary arrangements. We had allies in the company, board members who were skeptical of Ryan's sudden rise to power, but they had never had proof. Now they would. The first move was to take the evidence to the audit committee, to expose the fraud for what it was. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. My father had crossed a line, and I was done being the silent daughter, the ghost in the shadows. I would expose him for what he truly was: manipulative, deceitful, and corrupt. The plan was simple. We would present the evidence, let the board see it for themselves. And once they did, there would be no turning back. A company would be mine, and my father would be left with nothing but his lies. As we finalized the last details, I couldn't help but think of the years I had spent in silence. The years I had let them walk all over me. It was time for that to end. Tomorrow everything would change, and there was no going back. The plan was set. The next few days would be a blur of meetings, emails, and phone calls, each one calculated to weaken my father's position before the final showdown. Avon and Christopher had been invaluable, but this part of the battle was mine to fight. I had to walk into that room, look my father in the eye, and take control of everything he thought was his. I had never felt such a heavy burden. The stakes were high, too high for mistakes, for hesitation. But as much as I wanted to recoil, to retreat into the quiet, familiar shadows where I had spent so much of my life, I knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. About reclaiming everything that had been taken from me, and making sure they understood exactly what they had done. I spent hours in that war room, poring over the documents one last time. Armana's trust documents, the fraudulent CC filings, the emails between Michael and Kimberly, laced with manipulation. Each document I reviewed made my blood run colder. It wasn't just the money I was after, it was the truth they had worked so hard to bury. I had it all. All the proof I needed. David had been relentless in preparing the legal side. We had contacted the board members who were skeptical of Ryan's sudden rise to power. With the right leverage, he could bring everything to light. And now, it was time to stop playing their game. Time to expose Michael for the fraud he was. We had set the date for the meeting. A Thursday morning. The moment when everything would come to a head. As hours ticked by, I found it hard to breathe. I had been preparing for this day my entire life, but the weight of it was crushing. My father had built an empire, but it was built on lies. And now, it was time for me to tear it all down. The night before I didn't sleep. The city outside my window sparkled with the cold glow of streetlights, but inside everything was dark. I sat at the table, looking at the documents spread out in front of me. I had to be perfect. One slip up, one misstep, and they would bury me just like they had tried to do for years. But I couldn't afford to fail. I couldn't afford to let them win. David called me late in the night. His voice was calm, measured. "You've got this, Samuel. Remember, you have the truth on your side. They've been lying to the world for too long. Tomorrow, you expose them for what they are." I nodded into the phone, the weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. He was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every single lie they had told. About every time my father had turned a blind eye to the truth in favor of his own ego. The next morning came far too quickly. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of a man I barely recognized. I had always been the quiet one, the background player. But not anymore. Today, I would walk into that room and make them all see me for what I was. The true heir. The one who had built the company. Not Michael. Me. I dressed in a dark suit, sharp and fitting. The cut of the fabric felt different somehow, like it had become a second skin, one that I could wear into battle. I left the hotel room and made my way to the summit venue, my heart pounding in my chest. The hotel lobby was bustling with activity, the sound of polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, the murmur of voices in hushed conversation, but to me it was all just noise. My mind was focused, razor sharp. I was here to make my move. As I entered the venue, I caught a glimpse of my father, Michael, the man who had built everything on my mother's back and then tossed her aside like an old relic. He stood there, shaking hands with investors, laughing with colleagues, his face the picture of confidence. It sickened me. The man who had spent years erasing my existence, who had stolen my mother's legacy and called it his own. Amrita was nearby, effortlessly elegant, her gaze cold as she surveyed the crowd. And then there was Ryan, surrounded by a circle of sycophants, all hanging on his every word. They all looked so confident, so sure of themselves. They thought they had won. They thought I was gone. But today, I would prove them wrong. Christopher appeared at my side, his expression unreadable. He had arranged everything. All the pieces were in place. It was time. Ready? He asked. I nodded. Let's end this. We made our way through the crowd, passing the people who had once been my family, my allies, but who had now become the enemy. As we approached the boardroom, I could feel the tension building, each femme heavier than the last. I wasn't just walking into a meeting. I was walking into the heart of my father's empire, and I was about to tear it apart. At the door, Christopher turned to me. Once you walk in there, there's no turning back. You're in control now. Own it. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The room fell silent as I stepped inside, the eyes of the board members and my family all turning toward me. My father's smile faltered the moment he saw me. Kimberly's face went pale. Wank looked like he might choke on his words. For a moment no one spoke, and then, my father's voice broke the silence. What are you doing here, Samuel? You're not well. You shouldn't be here. I didn't flinch. I stood tall, my voice clear and unwavering. I'm here to take back what's mine. The room held its breath. The boardroom went completely still. My father's voice cracked through the silence. You shouldn't be here, Samuel. You're not well. I stood tall, unwavering, letting the weight of my presence sink in. The words I had rehearsed in my mind for so long finally spilled from my lips, calm and sure. I'm here to take back what's mine. The tension in the room was palpable. The board members, once eager to hear my father's words, now watched with rapt attention. The air felt thick with expectation. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but it was a steady rhythm, not one of panic. This was the moment I had prepared for. This was where everything would change. Michael's face twisted in disbelief, his charming facade cracking under the pressure. You have no place here. He spat, his eyes narrowing as he tried to regain control. You're delusional. You're megally incompetent. I didn't flinch. You're the one who's been lying to everyone. You've been stealing what's rightfully mine for years. Kimberly, standing beside him, flinched slightly, her mouth opening as if to speak, but she stopped herself. She had always been quick with words, always had an answer. But today there was nothing. My gaze shifted to Ryan, sitting confidently at the end of the table, the same smug grin he had always worn plastered across his face. I hadn't said a word yet, but I could see the panic flicker in his eyes. The tide was turning, and he knew it. I moved toward the screen at the front of the room. The massive display flickered to life as I pulled up the first document, one that would change everything. The original incorporation papers. My mother's name stood proudly at the top, Jennifer Hayes, majority shareholder, 60%, Michael Morgan 40%. I said, pointing at the document on the screen, is the truth. This is the real foundation of this company. Not what you've been telling the world. Michael's face twisted, and his hand shot up to stop the projector. He was too late. The image was already burned into their minds. The truth was out. Kimberly's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, but I didn't let her make the call. A company has been built on lies, on deceit. I continued, my voice rising as I felt the power of the truth coursing through me. My mother put it, and I've been here, doing the work, while you took the credit. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words settle into the room. The murmurs among the board members started to grow, each of them beginning to realize the enormity of what was happening. Christopher, standing beside me, didn't say a word, but his presence was an anchor. Anchor there when I needed someone to believe in me, to trust that I could do this. And now, we were in the home stretch. Everything I had uncovered, all the years of manipulation and lies, were about to be exposed for what they were. I moved to the next slide. The fraudulent SEC filing, the one that Michael had filed, claiming I was permanently incapacitated after the accident. It was his final move to take control of the company, to rewrite history, to cement Ryan's place in the power structure. The lie that had been the backbone of his corporate coup. This, I said, my voice low and filled with anger, his femoral fraud. You used a false medical report to declare me incapacitated. And with that, you gave Ryan stock options that should have been mine. You changed the rules when you thought no one was watching. Ryan shifted in his seat, his face pale now, the confident posture from moments ago evaporating. This is ridiculous, he finally managed to say, his voice shaky. You're trying to ruin everything. I'm not ruining anything, I said, cutting him off. I'm just putting everything back where it belongs. It's time for the truth to come out. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I could feel the tide turning. It wasn't just the documents that had them rattled, it was the truth in my words. For so long, they had followed Michael's lead, allowing him to call the shots, believing his version of events. But now, Aid had no choice but to see me for what I was, the rightful heir to the throne. David's voice rang out from the side of the room. The board has been questioning the efficiency of the company's operations for some time. They've suspected something wasn't right, but they didn't have proof. The weight of his statement hit like a hammer. The murmurs grew louder. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the entire company. About everything Michael had built on his lies. I turned to face the board. Mike, steady. You're all here because you want to know the truth. You want to know why things aren't working. Well, now you do. This company was never just Michael's, it was my mother's. And now it's mine. Michael's face was red with anger, his fists clenched tightly by his sides. This is absurd. He shouted, his voice breaking. You have no right to do this. I built this company. You're just a... I didn't let him finish. I took a step toward him, my voice clear and cold. You built this company with my mother's mind, Michael. You never built anything. And now I'm taking it back. The room was silent for a long moment. The board members were no longer looking at Michael. Some were looking at me. Some with pity, some with skepticism, but none with the blind loyalty they had once shown him. I took a deep breath, then turned to the screen again. The final piece of the puzzle. The vote. The one that would strip Michael of his power. It was time to finish what I had started. Let's make this official, I said, pulling up the vote. We need a vote of no confidence in Michael Morgan as CEO. The room was silent for only a heartbeat before the vote was called. And when the vote passed, the change was swift. Michael, once the all-powerful patriarch of this empire, was out. Ryan's smug expression fell as quickly as his father's grip on power. The board members moved toward me. For the first time, I saw their eyes shift, saw the respect start to form. It wasn't just about the shares, or the money. It was about power. The kind that could not be stolen. The kind that came from truth. I had won. The company was mine. The room was still. The board members sat in silence, processing the gravity of what had just happened. Michael Morgan, once the unchallenged patriarch, was now out. The power had shifted, and it was all so fast, so definitive. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on me, but I kept my posture straight, my gaze steady. I wasn't going to show any weakness now. Not after everything I had been through. David stood beside me, face a mask of approval. Kristar had already started moving to secure the next steps, contacting the right people, making the official announcements. But none of them mattered yet. Not in this moment. In this room, in front of my father, this was where the power was solidified. I had taken control. I could see it in their eyes. The disbelief, the shock. They had never expected this. Michael's face had gone pale. His jaw clenched so tight it looked like his teeth might crack. His usual bravado, the confidence that came with years of manipulation and control, was gone. In its place was the raw panic of a man who had just lost everything he thought he owned. Kimberly's expression was equally stunned, while she masked it quickly with her usual icy composure. She adjusted her designer glasses, lips pressed tight. She didn't say a word, but I knew she was seething inside. She had always thought of me as an inconvenience, a problem to be disposed of, but now I was the one standing here, in control. It must have felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. Ryan, on the other hand, looked like he might pass out. His face was flushed, his fingers twitching slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. He had always taken the easy route, never earning the recognition he got. Hank walked in with confidence, thinking that everything was his for the taking, only to have it all ripped away in an instant. The smug look that had been there when he first entered the room had vanished, replaced by something closer to fear. I wasn't done yet though. This was just the beginning. The board was in disarray, some members looking to Michael, others to me. They had seen the documents, the proof, the fraud. The lies were no longer hidden. Now was time for them to make their choice. And I knew, deep down, that I had already won. The truth had a power all its own, and once it was out in the open, there was no turning back. I turned to face the group, each seen the evidence. The vote of no confidence in Michael has already passed, I said, my voice calm but resolute. Now it's time to move forward. Hieroglyph Dynamics needs a leader who understands its true potential. Leader who built it, not one who merely took the credit. Christopher spoke up from behind me, his tone firm, almost as if he were giving a final command. The transition needs to happen today. The board can either support Samuel and move forward, or they can continue with the same corruption that got us here. David stepped forward then, offering a comforting but stern smile, his eyes sweeping across the room. It's simple. We'll be appointing a new CEO, Samuel will take over. If anyone has a problem with that, now is the time to speak. I didn't wait for anyone to protest. The silence had already spoken louder than any words ever could. Slowly the board members began to nod in agreement. There were no objections. No more questions. It was over. I had done it. Michael's voice finally broke through the quiet, but it was strained, desperate. You can't do this. You don't know what you're taking on. I looked at him, his face filled with a mix of rage and fear, but all I felt was pity. You did this to yourself, Michael, I said, The words leaving my mouth with a finality that made it clear this was the end of the line for him. You built this company on lies, and now it's time for it to be rebuilt, and this time, it will be built on truth. There was a long moment where it seemed like Michael was going to say something else, some final plea, but he didn't. He just sat there staring at me, defeated. Kimberly, too, said nothing. She simply stood there, hands clasped, her gaze hard but unwilling to argue further. It was clear that they had lost. Ryan, still trying to regain his composure, finally stood up. This isn't over, he muttered, and there was no fire behind his words. No confidence, just the whimper of a man who had lost everything. I didn't respond. There was no need to. The truth was out. I was in control now. I looked around the room one last time, meeting each of their eyes. Let's get to work, I said. Helpless Dynamics has a future. And it starts with me. The weight that had been pressing down on me for years, of being invisible, of being undervalued, lifted in that moment. I could feel the power surge through me. Not because I had the shares or the title, but because I had the truth on my side. I was no longer a ghost in the background. I was the one who was going to rebuild, who was going to make this company what it was always meant to be. As I walked out of the room, I could feel the eyes of the board members on me. For the first time in my life, they were looking at me, not as the invisible son of Michael Morgan, but as the true leader of Helpless Dynamics. It wasn't just a victory over my father, it was the start of a new chapter for me, one where I would finally take my rightful place. The morning after the board vote, everything felt different. The weight of the decisions that had been made the day before hung heavy in the air, but there was a clarity now, a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. I stood at the window of my new office, watching the sun rise over the city. The view was almost the same as it had been when I worked in the basement, buried in the data, hidden away in the shadows. But now, it felt like a world that was finally mine. The first step was immediate. I needed to make it clear to everyone that Helpless Dynamics was no longer Michael's company. It was mine, and the changes I planned to implement would reflect that. I called an all-staff meeting that morning. The room is packed with employees from every department, all of them unsure of what to expect. They had watched the drama unfold from the sidelines, not knowing who would come out on top. But today, they would find out. I stood at the front of the room, the buzz of whispered conversations dying down as I stepped up to the podium. Everyone's eyes were on me. The once quiet son of Michael Morgan. The invisible hair. The ghost in the room. But now, Anne was the one in charge, and it was time they knew who I was. Thank you all for being here. I began, my voice calm but firm. I know there's been a lot of uncertainty around the company's future. And today, I want to make it clear that the future of Helpless Dynamics is in good hands. There was a pause, a ripple of surprise moving through the crowd. They had been expecting a hostile takeover, a battle for the company's soul. What they hadn't expected was a calm, confident leader who wasn't here to destroy, but to rebuild. My mother was the heart and soul of this company. I continued. But everything I've done since her death has been to honor her legacy. For far too long, the truth has been buried. The work you've all done, the foundation you've built, has been overshadowed by lies. That ends now. I could see the employees listening more intently, some nodding. I was still unsure. But I was used to being doubted. That's all I had ever known. What mattered now was that they would believe in me, not because of my father's name, but because of the work I would do for them, for the company. I'm not here to tear everything down. I'm here to make sure Helpless Dynamics grows into what it was always meant to be, a company driven by truth, integrity, and innovation. As I spoke, I could see the faces of the executives who had been with my father, the ones who had served him for years. They were shifting uncomfortably, unsure of where they stood now. And then there was Ryan, standing in the back, his arms crossed, his face flushed with barely contained rage. He had always expected things to go his way, to be handed everything. But today, the game had changed. I finished my speech with a simple, yet powerful statement. This company belongs to all of us now. I'm committed to making sure it thrives. Together we will take it to new heights. The room was silent for a beat before a slow, hesitant applause began. The tension that had been thick in the air started to lift. Employees were still uncertain, but there was a glimmer of hope, a spark that told me they were ready for the change I was promising. Later that afternoon, I met with the board. It was time to make the changes official. The votes had already been cast, and the future of the company was now in my hands. The paperwork was signed, the changes approved. It felt surreal, like I was signing away my past in exchange for something new, something that was entirely mine. And that was the price of power, of taking control. I couldn't look back now. Not with everything I had already done, not with everything I had already lost. When the meeting was over, I left the boardroom with a sense of finality. Act 1. The fight wasn't over, of course. There was still much to be done. There would be challenges, people who would try to undermine me, to doubt me. But I was ready. I had to be. My office, I sat at the desk, staring at the photo of my mother that still sat on the corner. She had known, even before she passed, that this day would come. That I would be the one to take back the company she had built, to reclaim the legacy that was stolen from us both. My phone buzzed. It was Christopher. "We've got the ball rolling on the next steps," he said. "The legal documents for the restructuring are already in motion. We've got the support we need from the right board members. It's happening." "Good," I replied, leaning back in the chair. "Now, let's make sure they know we're just getting started." I hung up the phone and turned to the window again. The city stretched out before me, a sprawling labyrinth of opportunity and challenge. Aeroglyph Dynamics was my inheritance now, not just in shares or money, but in spirit, my mother's spirit, and I would carry it forward, no matter what it took. In the days that followed, I kept my focus on one thing: rebuilding. I restructured the company with a team I could trust. I started reshaping the culture, making sure that every department, and every person working for me understood that their contributions mattered. That they mattered. I brought in new leadership, a diverse team that would reflect the company I wanted to create, one driven by innovation, by integrity, and by respect for the work that had been done. I turned my attention to Ryan. I had no interest in revenge, not yet, but he needed to learn what it meant to start from the bottom, to work his way up as I had done. I re-signed him to a junior data analytics position. His shocked, of course. His father's son, now a cog in the machine. But I had to make sure he understood that there was no room for entitlement in this company anymore. When the first funds from my mother's trust arrived, I knew exactly what I had to do. I created the Jennifer Hayes Foundation for Women in Technology, a tribute to my mother's legacy and to the women who had been left behind in this industry for far too long, and was a way for me to honor her, and for me to ensure that the future of technology would be one that embraced diversity, innovation, and empowerment. I didn't need the satisfaction of watching my father's downfall. That was never the point. What mattered now was the future, the one I was building, one step at a time. And in that future, there would be no more ghosts. Only people who had earned their place at the table. And that was enough.